Welcome to today's deep dive.
Hello.
It is Monday, March 9th, 2026. And today, we're actually taking a pretty massive leap backwards.
Yeah, way backwards.
Right, away from the headlines of the present and plunging straight into the heart of the 5th century. We have a very specific mission today. You and I are about to explore one of the most cataclysmic, world-altering events in human history.
Absolutely.
The sack of Rome.
By the Goths.
Exactly, under King Alaric in the year 410 AD.
Right.
But we aren't just looking at the physical destruction, the swords and the siege engines.
No, the real focus here, what's truly fascinating, is the better cultural warfare that followed.
The philosophical warfare.
Exactly, the immediate aftermath.
So to really understand this moment, we're using a foundational piece of source material today.
A massive one.
Yeah. We're going to be exploring excerpts from St. Augustine's The City of God, Volume 1.
Specifically the translation by Reverend Marcus Dodds.
Right. And this text is essentially, well, it's the ultimate cultural defense mechanism.
It really is. It was written right in the ashes of the Roman Empire's greatest psychological defeat.
Just trying to make sense of a world that felt like it had literally just ended.
Yeah.
But before we take a single step further into this historical landscape, I really need to offer a very important disclaimer to you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
The source material we're pulling from today contains incredibly intense and sometimes highly polarizing religious rhetoric.
It was a literal culture war.
Right, between early Christians and traditional pagans in the fading days of the Roman Empire. So we want to make it absolutely clear that we, as your hosts, we are not taking sides here.
It's not at all.
We're not endorsing the religious viewpoints of the text, nor are we condemning the ancient pagan traditions.
We are strictly acting as impartial guides.
Just here to unpack the fascinating historical arguments and the philosophical ideas exactly as they appear in the original source material.
That distinction is paramount. We're observing the battlefield of ideas from a completely neutral vantage point.
Just examining how a society processes an unfathomable trauma.
And the arguments they construct to blame their rivals or defend their worldview.
Exactly. Okay, so let's set the stage. I want you to imagine, just for a second, the sheer shock of an eternal city falling.
An unconquered city.
Right. Rome had stood unconquered by a foreign enemy for roughly 800 years.
8 centuries.
It was the undisputed center of the known universe. The bedrock of civilization, law, engineering.
Order.
Yeah, order. Think about the institutions in your own life today. The financial capitals, the seats of government.
The systems you just assume will always be there.
Imagine waking up today to find that those unshakable structures had just collapsed overnight.
Just gone.
The capital of your world breached, looted, and set on fire by a foreign army.
The psychological devastation from the center all the way to the circumference of the known world was almost impossible to overstate.
People were terrified.
Oh, absolutely. When news reached places as far away as Bethlehem, scholars like Jerome actually wept. He wrote that the bright light of the world had been extinguished. People literally thought the apocalypse was happening.
But right in the middle of this apocalyptic nightmare, as the Goths poured through the Salarian Gate, something entirely unprecedented happened.
Unheard of in ancient warfare.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where the historical context gets really surprising. When Alaric and his Gothic army stormed Rome, they brought all the slaughter and plundering you'd expect.
Burning, misery, the works.
But amidst that chaotic violence, there was this shocking display of mercy.
Yeah.
The Goths, who the Romans viewed as ruthless barbarians, deliberately spared the Christian churches.
Specifically, the reliquaries.
Right, the physical containers holding the sacred remains of Christian martyrs. And they bypassed the enormous churches dedicated to the apostles.
Like St. Peter's and St. Paul's.
Exactly. So why was this so revolutionary?
Well, you really have to dive into the historical customs of war. Augustine analyzes this brilliantly. In the ancient world, when a city fell, temples were never safe. The sanctuaries were often the first targets for looting. The gods of the conquered were considered conquered themselves.
And Augustine points back to the Romans' own foundational myths to prove this right.
He does. He brings up the Greeks sacking Troy. In the very poetry the Romans revered.
Like Virgil's Aeneid?
Yes, the poetry they taught their kids. We see Greek heroes murdering Trojans directly in the sacred temples.
He paints this brutal picture of Priam, the elderly king of Troy, slaughtered right at the altar.
The sanctuary meant nothing to the Greeks.
And they actually used the Temple of Juno as a vault, didn't they?
They did. They set up guards in the temple not to protect survivors, but to guard the gold, the captured boys, the enslaved women.
Wow.
The sacred spaces were desecrated and turned into holding pens for human trafficking.
That was just standard operating procedure for a sack in antiquity.
Completely standard.
But Augustine doesn't just stop at ancient Troy. He brings up the Romans' own history of conquest.
Because the Romans loved to pride themselves on their clemency.
Right, they had this whole national self-image of sparing the vanquished.
But Augustine holds a harsh historical mirror up to them. He looks at the Roman sack of the great Greek city of Syracuse under Marcus Marcellus.
A very distinguished general.
Right, and Marcellus is fascinating because he famously wept over the impending ruin of Syracuse.
He knew what his army was about to do.
He even issued a pre-battle edict attempting to preserve the chastity of free persons. He genuinely wanted to be merciful.
But the military machine took over.
Exactly. The city was still sacked according to brutal customs. Blood flowed. The temples of Syracuse were stripped bare. There were no orders to spare anyone who fled to a temple.
And then there's the story of Fabius Maximus.
Yes, who conquered Tarentum. His soldiers were looting and found these massive statues of the Tarentine gods. They asked Fabius what to do with them.
And he makes a joke.
Right, he says, let us leave with the Tarentines, their angry gods. He didn't offer sanctuary. He just didn't want the heavy loot slowing down his baggage train.
So Augustine's broader historical point is that even when Roman generals showed moderation, or wept, or joked,
the temples were still plundered, refugees enslaved, altars stained with blood.
The gods offered zero protection.
None.
So keeping that brutal precedent in mind, Rome in 410 AD wasn't just a battlefield. It was a sensory nightmare.
Absolutely terrifying.
Put yourself in the sandals of a 5th century Roman. Fires consuming ancient basilicas, thick smoke, citizens scrambling over rubble.
Pure panic.
Pagans and Christians alike sprinting toward the thresholds of Christian sanctuaries.
With the Goths right behind them?
Right, consumed by this adrenaline-fueled rage for slaughter.
Right.
But then, as Augustine describes it, that murderous fury is miraculously bridled right at the church doors.
It's incredible.
The text highlights this surreal detail where enemy soldiers who were pitiless murderers in the streets actually escorted captives to the churches to ensure they were spared.
An invading enemy acting as an armed escort to a religious sanctuary.
What's fascinating here is the human element, the commentary on human nature in a survival scenario.
Yeah. Augustine points out a profound, almost cynical irony.
Oh, the pagans hiding.
Exactly. Many traditional pagans in Rome despised Christianity, blamed it for everything. But when the swords were drawn, they suddenly claimed the name of Christ to escape death.
Hiding in the Christian churches.
Pretending to be servants of Christ just to survive.
It's like hiding from a mob inside a vegan restaurant. And the second you step outside, you write a 1-star review complaining about the tofu.
That's a great way to put it, because the moment the danger passes, what do?
They walk out and immediately start hurling curses at the religion that just saved them.
They attribute their survival to good luck or blind fate, not the sanctuary.
And they blame Christ for the fact that the city was sacked in the first place.
Consider how often people in a crisis will leverage a system to survive, only to vilify it the moment they feel safe.
A staggering display of ingratitude, and it forms the entire catalyst for Augustine writing this text.
It really does.
So the smoke hasn't even cleared, and the finger-pointing begins. It's a massive public relations crisis. The blame game erupts.
The pagans had to make sense of why Rome fell.
Right, and the prevailing rumor was that Rome fell because the empire had officially abandoned the old gods.
The Pax Deorum. The peace of the gods.
The civic religion was highly contractual.
Exactly. The argument was, for centuries, we worshipped Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, we performed sacrifices, and they protected us. Now the emperors are Christian, temples are shut down, and look what happened.
The contract is broken.
The gods have abandoned us to the barbarians. There was even a proverb, drought and Christianity go hand in hand.
If anything bad happened, blame the Christians.
Famine, plague, military defeat, all blamed on angering the old pantheon.
But Augustine meets this head-on with a devastating logical breakdown. He says basically, if your pagan gods were such great protectors, where were they during previous disasters?
And he points out a massive logical flaw regarding the origin of their gods.
The foundation myth of Rome.
Right. The Romans entrusted their defense to the Trojan gods, the ones Aeneas supposedly rescued from burning Troy.
Wait, if they're carrying the gods out of Troy, the gods are basically luggage at that point.
Exactly.
Augustine is asking, Why entrust your eternal city to vanquished defenders?
He uses Virgil against them again. Virgil describes the goddess Juno as hostile to the Trojans and the gods of Troy as conquered.
So what kind of madness is it to trust them to guard Rome?
If they couldn't protect Troy from the Greeks, how could they protect Rome from the Goths?
He suggests Rome preserve the gods, not the other way around.
A brilliant inversion. The gods were just statues of wood and stone that needed human guards. When the guards fell, the gods were lost.
It strips away the supernatural aura of the civic religion entirely.
But Augustine knows logic puzzles aren't enough for a traumatized population. He needs hard historical evidence.
And here's where it gets really interesting. He brings up a piece of history from just a few years prior to the sack. The story of Radagaisus,
Another Gothic king.
a terrifying warlord who threatened Rome just before Alaric. But there was a defining difference between the two.
Their religion. Alaric had Christian sympathies. He was an Arian Christian, which is why he respected the churches. Radagaisus was a traditional fundamentalist pagan,
Worshipping what Augustine calls demons.
offering daily blood sacrifices. And he commanded a massive army, over 100,000 men pouring into Italy.
So you have this warlord doing everything the Roman pagans claim is necessary for victory. Sacrificing, praying to the old gods, massive numerical advantage.
The tension in Rome was suffocating. The pagans were actively complaining that Rome couldn't defeat him because Rome had abandoned sacrifices.
They thought the gods would side with the barbarian.
They genuinely believed it.
But then history delivers an incredible anticlimax. What happens when this God-fearing army reaches the mountains of Italy?
One of the most lopsided military defeats in ancient history. Radagaisus's massive army is outmaneuvered by the Roman general Stilicho, trapped in the hills near Fiesole.
Starved out.
Utterly crushed in a single day. And the incredible part, it happened without a single Roman casualty.
Not one Roman soldier killed.
Not even wounded in the final collapse. Radagaisus and his sons were captured and executed.
The narrative whiplash is intense, and Augustine seizes on this.
He says to the Romans, look at Radagaisus. If pagan sacrifices guaranteed military victory, he should have conquered Rome with his eyes closed.
He was doing exactly what they claimed the empire needed.
Yet his gods did nothing for him when he was starving in Fiesole.
Augustine argues this was divine providence, proving pagan rituals do not secure earthly safety.
Trapping the critics in a logical corner. If the gods couldn't save their most devoted warlord, how could the Romans claim a lack of sacrifices allowed Alaric into Rome?
It severs the causal link. And once he dismantles that argument, he pivots to an even deeper, more uncomfortable truth.
The broader historical context.
Right, shifting away from the external barbarian threat and turning a glaring spotlight on the internal reality of the Roman Republic.
His central thesis becomes that Rome wasn't murdered by the Goths in 410 AD. It was already dead.
Dying of a moral sickness for centuries.
A masterstroke of argumentation. You want to talk about the fall of Rome, let's talk about the true fall of the Republic.
And he doesn't use Christian historians for this.
No, the pagans would dismiss that as biased. He uses Rome's own revered historians, Sallust and Cicero.
Using their own words to prove the moral collapse happened long before Christ was born.
Let's dig into that. He focuses heavily on the era following the destruction of Carthage.
Rome's great rival in North Africa.
During the Punic Wars, they fought these massive conflicts for control of the Mediterranean.
And as long as Carthage existed, the fear of that enemy forced Romans to maintain civic unity.
They had to be disciplined. They had to maintain their primitive morality, as Sallust called it, or Hannibal would destroy them.
External pressure forged internal cohesion. But then Rome wins. Carthage is destroyed, burned to the ground.
The external pressure vanishes overnight.
Augustine highlights this debate in the Roman Senate before Carthage was destroyed. Sallust points out that Scipio Nasica,
A respected statesman,
vehemently opposed the destruction of Carthage, while others like Cato the Elder ended every speech with, "Carthage must be destroyed."
Nasica stood up and said, no, we have to keep them around.
Because he understood a dark truth about human nature. Security is the enemy of weak minds.
A profound psychological insight. He viewed fear as a necessary social muscle. Remove the fear, the muscle atrophies.
Without a unified fear, the Romans would turn their aggression inward, turn on themselves.
And the historians admit Nasica was right. Sallust records that once Carthage was gone, a tidal wave of disastrous evils flooded Roman society.
Security bred luxury, luxury bred avarice and ambition. The primitive manners were swept away as by a torrent.
Justice was no longer maintained by a sense of right, but by the threat of violence.
And this decay led to absolute bloodshed in the streets.
Augustine details the horrors of the Roman civil wars. Marius, Sulla, the Gracchi brothers.
Putting the Gothic sack into perspective.
The pagans are crying about the Goths, and Augustine holds up their history book saying, "Look what you did to yourselves while worshipping the gods."
Let's talk about those gory details, because it exposes the hypocrisy. Romans did things to Romans that make the Goths look restrained.
The details are horrific. The head of the consul Octavius chopped off and displayed on a rostrum in the Roman Forum.
The two Crasses hunted down and murdered right in front of each other.
Accounts of a Roman soldier who stripped spoils off a slain foe, turned the body over, and realized he had killed his own brother.
And he committed suicide right there on the corpse.
The horror was immense.
But the most chilling story he brings up is Musius Scaevola, a Roman high priest.
During the massacres ordered by Marius, Scaevola fled for his life, and he clung to the sacred altar of the goddess Vesta for sanctuary.
Exactly what the refugees in 410 AD were doing in the Christian churches.
But when this Roman priest hid at the Roman altar from Roman soldiers, they gave him no quarter.
Slaughtered right there. His blood literally extinguished the sacred fire of Vesta.
The eternal flame that was supposed to ensure the survival of the city.
That imagery is incredibly potent. Augustine asks, where were your gods then? Why didn't you blame them for that moral collapse?
The destruction of the civil wars, citizens tearing each other apart, was a significantly worse tragedy than the Gothic invasion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's the ultimate historical mic drop. The Republic was already dead.
Cicero himself wrote, long before Christ was born, that the Republic was entirely extinct. They retained the name and facade, but lost the reality through their own vices.
Augustine systematically dismantles their ability to use the Gothic sack as a weapon by proving their pagan past was an era of self-destruction.
It's a devastating critique, but Augustine is also a bishop.
Yeah.
Faster.
Right. Winning a debate against dead senators doesn't comfort the living people sitting in front of him who just lost everything.
He has to address the very real, immediate suffering. The human cost was staggering.
Real individuals losing homes, wealth, loved ones, their physical freedom.
So he tackles three major areas of suffering: the loss of wealth, unburied bodies, and the terror of captivity.
And he doesn't offer hollow platitudes. He uses a philosophical framework to completely reframe these traumas.
Let's start with wealth. The economic devastation was absolute. Goths stripped villas, took life savings. How do you recover?
He reframes it by shifting the definition of what is truly valuable. He brings in the story of Paulinus, the bishop of Nola.
Nola was also sacked by barbarians. Paulinus was immensely wealthy, but when the barbarians took him prisoner and stripped his wealth, he didn't despair.
He silently prayed, "Lord, let me not be troubled for gold and silver, for where all my treasure is thou knowest."
Augustine uses this to introduce the concept of the internal citadel. True wealth, your character, faith, integrity is completely inaccessible to a barbarian horde.
You cannot loot character.
You cannot put a siege engine against faith.
If your primary treasure is internal, it's stored in a citadel no enemy sword can reach.
He's telling survivors, if you're devastated by the loss of your money, you confused your net worth with your actual worth.
He acknowledges the pain of losing property, but insists it doesn't touch the core of who you are.
And that leads into his response to the second trauma: unburied bodies.
The carnage was widespread, people couldn't bury their dead. And in the ancient world, leaving a body unburied was a horrific curse.
A desecration. The pagans were mocking the Christians, pointing to corpses in the streets saying, "Where is your God now?"
Profound psychological torment for the survivors. But Augustine offers a radical Stoic rebuttal.
He explains that the lack of a funeral functionally cannot harm the dead. The sight is distressing to the living, but the dead are beyond physical harm.
A funeral is for the comfort of the living.
To prove his point to a Roman audience, he quotes the Roman poet Lucan: "He who has no tomb has the sky for his vault."
He argues the Christian promise of resurrection isn't dependent on a neat burial. The Creator can reconstitute a body whether it was buried, devoured by beasts, or turned to ash.
Therefore, the lack of a funeral is not a punishment on the dead, because they cannot feel the loss. It removes the sting of the pagan mockery.
So he addresses wealth and bodies. What about those marched off in chains? Captivity was a fate worse than death for proud Romans.
The humiliation of serving a barbarian master.
How do you reframe slavery?
Augustine draws on historical and scriptural precedents to prove internal dignity survives physical chains. He compares captive Christians to Old Testament figures,
Like Daniel or the three youths in Babylon.
men who were conquered, taken from their homeland, forced to live under a hostile foreign power.
Yet their connection to the divine, their moral compass, remained entirely intact.
Augustine is teaching that physical bondage does not equal spiritual defeat. It's the internal citadel again.
You can be a slave in the physical earthly city, but a free citizen in the heavenly
The
city.
chains bind the wrists, they cannot bind the will.
Such a powerful reframing. And it forces self-reflection for us today. How do you define your own security?
If your city was sacked tomorrow, is your identity tied up in gold and silver?
Right.
Or hidden in an untouchable internal citadel?
It's a question of resilience. Now, that concept of internal resilience becomes paramount when Augustine addresses the most horrific aspect of the sack.
The violation of bodies.
Consecrated virgins and Christian wives subjected to sexual violence by the Gothic army.
The ultimate weapon the pagans used against Christians, pointing to violated women and saying, if your God is powerful, why did he allow this? They are ruined.
A cruel taunt aimed at traumatized survivors.
Relying on an ancient cultural belief that a woman's honor and purity were entirely physical states.
In Roman honor culture, if the body was violated, she was polluted, regardless of consent. Damaged goods.
But Augustine outlines a revolutionary argument regarding trauma, consent, and bodily autonomy. He argues that chastity and purity are virtues of the mind.
Not purely physical states.
A massive paradigm shift. Over 1,500 years ago, he's separating the physical body from the consenting will.
If the mind does not consent, the soul remains entirely unpolluted.
Even if the body is violently violated, the guilt lies entirely with the attacker.
The victim who suffers without consenting has committed no sin and lost no true purity.
To drive this home, he dismantles their cultural assumptions by contrasting this with the ultimate ancient Roman ideal of female purity.
The story of Lucretia.
A noble Roman matron tragically assaulted by the king's son. She told her husband and father, demanded vengeance, and then committed suicide from overwhelming shame.
Romans held her up as the pinnacle of virtue.
But Augustine deconstructs this myth to expose the toxic nature of Roman shame. He asks a piercing question.
Right, if Lucretia was innocent, if her mind did not consent, why did she execute herself?
If she was chaste, why was she punished with death?
It's a brilliant logical trap. If she was guilty, she shouldn't be praised. If innocent, killing herself was murdering an innocent woman.
He points out she didn't kill herself out of guilt, but because she couldn't bear the shame Roman society attached to being violated.
She valued the appearance of honor more than the reality of her innocence.
She allowed toxic societal judgment to be her executioner.
And to draw a sharper contrast, he introduces a Roman man, Marcus Apuleius Regulus.
A revered general captured by the Carthaginians, sent back to Rome to negotiate, but swore an oath to return if negotiations failed.
He tells the Senate not to accept the peace and willingly returns to Carthage knowing they'll kill him.
Tortured to death in an agonizing manner, put in a barrel driven full of spikes.
But the key detail, Regulus never committed suicide to escape the torture or humiliation he endured.
And Romans considered him a massive hero for his endurance, the definition of fortitude.
So Augustine uses this to challenge the double standard.
If Regulus is a hero for enduring physical suffering without taking his life, why shouldn't the Christian women who endured the horror of the Gothic sack be considered just as brave?
Why praise Regulus for endurance, but praise Lucretia for killing herself?
This raises an important question regarding how societies place the burden of shame on victims.
Augustine is attempting to liberate the survivors from that culturally imposed guilt.
Telling these women, you are not Lucretia. You don't have to execute yourselves to prove your innocence to a broken society.
You endured violence. Your mind remained pure. The shame belongs to the Goths.
He's healing deep psychological wounds by dismantling the toxic honor-shame culture.
Redefining human dignity. Telling survivors their value is not dictated by violence or societal judgment, but by their unbreakable inner resolve.
A stunning assertion of the sovereignty of the human mind.
So what does this all mean? We've covered an incredible amount of ground today.
Centuries of history, military disasters, complex philosophy.
Summarizing the core takeaways. We started by looking at the uncharacteristic mercy the Goths showed at the church doors.
We explored the historical blame game and how Augustine countered it by pointing out the failure of the pagan gods to save Radagaisus.
We saw how Rome's own historians proved the empire was morally bankrupt, centuries before the barbarians breached the walls.
And finally, how the text offered profound reframing for survivors. True wealth is internal, bodies don't need formal burial to be resurrected, and mental purity cannot be stolen by violence.
A stunning piece of intellectual history showing how people use philosophy to survive. And it leaves us with a final provocative thought.
Drawing on a foundational point Augustine makes, he mentions these two cities.
The earthly city of man, built on power, and the heavenly city of God, built on eternal principles.
He says they are entangled together in this world, intermixed until the last judgment.
Consider your own life. You are navigating an earthly city. You rely on societal structures, economies, political empires.
You build your life within those walls.
But history guarantees those structures might fall, just like Rome did.
The eternal city wasn't eternal.
So the ultimate question is, are you too entangled in the crumbling architecture of the society around you?
Is your identity tied to things that can be plundered or lost?
If the Goths of modern disruption arrived at your gates tomorrow, an economic collapse, a personal tragedy, massive societal upheaval, what parts of your life are truly eternal, and what parts are just waiting to be sacked?
It challenges us to build our internal citadel on something that survives the flames of history.
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the historical context of the fall of Rome, because sometimes looking back at the collapse of the ancient world is the absolute best way to understand how to stand firm in our own. Until next time, keep exploring.